All right, and we are live. Um, Dr. Devin Naar, thank you so much for being here. For those who don't know, Dr. Devin Naar is the Isaac Alhadeff Professor in Sephardic Studies at University of Washington, where he chairs the Sephardic Studies program. His award-winning book, Jewish Salonika, traces the story of Salonika's Jews through the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the rise of modern Greece. And he built the first major online Sephardic studies digital library and archive there. And he also has this very cool book that came out through Jewish Currents with an amazing like introductory essay that is a big part of why we're having this conversation. So look this up, Reclaiming the Ladino Left, if you all want some more after this conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Devin, for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. Is there anything that I didn't say in your bio that you think would be of interest to folks watching or
No,
listening?
I think that's fine. I think we'll get
Okay,
into some more,
cool.
I think, as we move forward, but that's fine.
Sweet.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Yeah. So this is a weird moment in the Jewish world, right? And you've been really engaged with this moment for a long time through Jewish Currents, and I've really appreciated the stuff that you've been writing and bringing up because, as you know very well, like the American Jewish world is really deeply Ashkenazi centric without knowing it, and a lot of your work is helping folks understand what it would be like to integrate Sephardic history, Sephardic thought into the American Jewish story. So when you like hear about organizations like ours and others that are right now trying to like reclaim a Judaism, what does it bring up for you having been on this kind of edge of trying to bring forward Sephardic history?
I appreciate you opening with that, with that question because it's an invitation for potentially some, criticism, and I mean to make yourself and your organization vulnerable, and I really do appreciate that. And today does happen to mark Tisha B'av, which is it's a Jewish holiday of mourning and also self-reflection. So maybe there's a small tie-in there. Um, I think one of the challenges, of course, is what do we mean by Ashkenazi? I think that's like one interesting thing because even that term is a mishmash and a merging of a variety of different historical practices and traditions and philosophies and geographical origins and cultural dynamics that we now consider like as a one kind of entity, the Ashkenazi, like people speak about Ashkenormativity and the Ashkenazi centrism, but that's in some way it's not trying to say it's a misnomer, but I am wanting to add a kind of complexity to understanding that even what is Ashkenazi is kind of it's really a modern term in the way that we use it, and we maybe got to disentangle a little bit. Like
Yeah.
before the program began, we were speaking a little bit about the origins of the American Council of Judaism, which comes out of the Reform movement, and the Reform movement comes out of Central European German speaking the German speaking Jewish tradition. And that's like one kind of Ashkenazi Jewish tradition. But most American Jews trace their genealogical origins and cultural origins to the Eastern European Yiddish speaking context. And,
Including me. Yeah.
right, yeah, right. And,
Yeah.
and, and part of me too. And, 150 years ago, there were a lot of tensions between these two communities that we consider Ashkenaz, the Reform and the more observant from Eastern Europe, the more integrating German-speaking and English-speaking Reform Jews and the Yiddish-speaking, Jewish masses. Not to say anything about the Galicianers and the Litvaks or the Hasidim and the Misnagdim. So what do we say when we speak about Ashkenazi dominance in the United States? And I think one way to think about it is by reference to how this kind of European centered way of understanding Jewishness came to be concretized in American institutional and cultural life. And I was thinking a little bit about a rabbi and historian, Jacob Rader Marcus. He was a very well-known Reform rabbi and historian. And in his scholarship, he wrote a tremendous amount of scholarship about American Jews, and he described this phenomenon of the homo novus, the new being, the new figure that would emerge, which is the new American Jew. And he spoke about the merging of different Jewish traditions and communities through intermarriage, marriage,
Mhm.
through cultural adaptations, and merging through this kind of Jewish melting pot, which, and I have a little quote here, dissolved Europe's disparate national loyalties. All Jewish natives now thought of themselves only as Americans. They were no longer Germans, Russians, Poles, Romanians. Who's not there? Okay,
Yeah.
it's a European understanding of the basis of American Jewishness,
And a very particular part of
and very
European, right?
particular. Right. So
Yeah.
Germany, Russia, Poland, and Romania he includes. He doesn't go further east or south. So there's no space in this version of the new American Jew for Sephardic Jews. And he actually goes on to explain why, like at least implies why they're not going to be part of this new American Jewish identity. And he allocates 4 pages of 800 pages to Jews from the Muslim world. He calls them Levantine Jews. And he said that the reason is essentially that these Levantine Jews, these Sephardic Jews, these Jews from the Muslim world, formed their own little ghetto. That's what he called it. They were poor, they were downtrodden, and here's the big one, they suffered from centuries of Muslim blight that made it difficult for these refugees to pull themselves up from their bootstraps and to work cooperatively for common cultural goals.
Whoa.
So there's a lot to unpack there, but the idea, and this is not a marginal figure, like this is a major,
No.
major liberal thinker,
Well, the,
right?
the archives in Cincinnati that are the biggest Jewish American archives are called the Jacob Rader Marcus Archives. Yeah.
Correct. So he's a major figure. This is his attitude. Okay, this is his attitude. These people are outside because sucks to be them. I mean, they're backwards. There's no hope for them, essentially.
Yeah.
And if they're separate, it's because they did it themselves. They formed
Yeah.
their own ghetto, and they are not able to work cooperatively to participate in broader American Jewish life. So
And
that
Hannah
is,
Arendt had a very similar take too,
yes,
which
yes,
is really disappointing.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So a lot of these storied figures had their own prejudices and reflected some of the broader racist thinking that is at play. So, I
Yeah.
mean, to go back to your question then about organizations like yours, I mean, what are the Ashkenazi, like if we can say this new American Jewish Ashkenazi based understanding of Jewishness, which translate also into an assumption that Jewishness is the Ashkenazi version of it, or one of the Ashkenazi variations. So names and places of origin and languages and practices and pronunciations and foods and theater, everything is stemming from the European Ashkenazi universe. That's this Ashkenazi dominance that you're referring to. How does it implicitly maybe play out in the assumptions undergirding organizations like yours? And that's a really interesting question. I think for me, one of the concepts is in the title of the organization, which is Judaism.
Mhm.
And for me, Judaism, I think knowing that the ACJ, sorry, American Council for Judaism, comes out of the Reform movement, it positions itself really in this intellectual lineage of the Central European Jewish uh, uh, battle for emancipation, battle for rights,
Yeah.
battle for civil and political equality. And one of the arguments, I mean, you know this very well, one of the arguments that is made at the beginning of the 19th century, the 18 teens and 1820s and afterwards, is that Jews in what is now Germany should think of themselves as Jewish, not in terms of national identity, not in terms of ethnic identity, but in terms of religion alone. That
Right.
they are, that Jewishness is Judaism, the religion, like there's Protestantism and then there's Catholicism, and that Jews should be like their neighbors. And if they act like their neighbors in a respectable way, they will be in turn respected, and that will earn them the rights of equal citizenship. And so Jewishness moves away from being a totalizing all-encompassing community, enterprise, or civilization, and it becomes a kind of religious orientation. Jews of the Mosaic persuasion, so to speak. And
Sure.
so for me, that's a Central European Ashkenazi version. Eastern European Ashkenazi version is actually very different than that. But as it relates to the Sephardic world, it's also very different because in the Sephardic world, and by which, again, there are many different Sephardic worlds. I'm going to again take a snippet of that. The Sephardic Jewish world of the Ottoman Empire. These are the descendants of those Jews who traced their ancestry to Spain and were expelled from 1492, and many of them fled to the Muslim world of the Ottoman Empire, where they continued to live until the 20th century, and some even still today in the post-Ottoman universe. But these Jewish communities did not experience reform. They didn't experience the emergence of denominations. There was not really a robust Jewish question that they had to contest with. There was not state-sponsored anti-Semitism in the 19th century in the same way. And so, like Jews in the Ottoman Empire they are granted Ottoman nationality in 1869, which is before Jews in Germany become
Yeah.
citizens. So they're grappling with a different set. And I was thinking about what are the terms in Ladino that the Ladino-speaking Jews used during this period in the late 19th and into the 20th century. They are considered a millet in the language of the Ottoman Empire. And a millet, the scholars tend to translate that term as ethno-religious community, which is, they didn't have that language then.
Of course not.
How
Yeah.
did the Ladino press translate millet from Ottoman Turkish into Ladino? Nación, nation. So they
Interesting.
understood themselves and they spoke about what are the millets. Technically, they were based on religious categories. There were Muslim, Christian, and Jewish millets. The Ladino press spoke about the millet de los Gregos, the Greek millet, de los Turcos, the Turkish millet, and that means Christian. Greeks means Christian. Turks means
Oh,
and Jews, well, Jews means Jews. So they have this a little bit more kind of robust dynamic because they're granted rights without the abolition of Jewish community life. Like you cannot, like in Europe and in the United States in particular, 19th century moving onward, being Jewish is something you pick. It's a voluntary kind of thing. You want to be Jewish? You can be Jewish. You don't want to be Jewish? You don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to affiliate with a Jewish community or congregation. In the Ottoman Empire, and in some of its successor states, being Jewish continues to be imposed upon you by the state. And in some instances, like the largest of the Ladino speaking communities in Salonika, which happens to be where my family's from, it's where I wrote the book about it you mentioned earlier, Jews continued to be legally recognized as part of the Jewish community through the Second World War. So there was no way of not being part of this Jewish neo-millet, so to speak. So
did
that's,
that
yeah.
did that make them were there legal ramifications to that insofar as like rabbis had actual legal power over that community?
Yes. And so that's like it continues to have some of the functions that we associate with like a pre-modern Jewish community
Mhm.
continuing till World War II. So, for example,
Yeah.
you want to get married, you need the rabbi's approval. You can't marry somebody who's not Jewish. I mean, it's like Israel today is a
Right.
post-Ottoman state and has the Ottoman legacies. There's no civil marriage. Civil marriage is introduced in Greece in 1982 as a precondition for Greece to join the EU. In the 1930s, the Greek state passes a law saying that if Jews violate the rulings of the rabbis as it relates to civil status like marriage, divorce, alimony, we, the Greek state, will put you in jail
Wow.
in the 1930s. So it's a very different kind of dynamic. So for me, this is like I don't like want to say it's Ashkenormative. It's not Ashkenormative, but it is a legacy of the reform movement, I would say, in the vocabulary and its
Yeah.
specific American instantiation of American Judaism, in which also the idea is that Jews are going to become white people, and we're going to become respectable, and we're going to become part of the so-called mainstream. Will Herberg's famous book, what is it, Catholic Protestant? I don't remember the order, Protestant Catholic Jew, uh,
Yeah.
which comes out in the 50s, essentially making this argument. And by the way, in that book, he does have one line about Sephardic Jews, where he says that it's a footnote. It's the only thing that he has to say about it. He says that Sephardic Jews, in order to be considered real Jews, have to learn Yiddish. Yeah. So you see the dynamics here.
Yeah, yeah. And it's I mean, it's fascinating because that is also certainly like explicitly part of the ACJ's history, right? Like part of the leadership, part of the membership, like not all of it, early on, their concern with Zionism was that it would affect their status as good Americans, to be perceived as dually loyal. And that was like one of the primary issues for many, not all. Like the rabbis were primarily issued, or their primary issue was also theological and justice oriented. But a lot of the lay people were very focused on like wanting to maintain their status that they had gained over those many decades into becoming like normal Americans,
Right.
of just like white people in the hierarchy, for sure.
Well, I mean, the question of Zionism is also very interesting because what we see in the case of the Ladino-speaking Jews of the Ottoman Empire in the late 19th and early 20th centuries is a profound opposition to political Zionism from a very different angle. You know, today there is this association between Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews and conservative politics and traditionalism. That's true to some extent. But in the context of the Ottoman Empire and among Ottoman Jews coming to the United States, the attitudes were very different for a similar reason that you're describing what the Reform Jews were doing in the United States. They wanted to protect their position in the United States. So too did Ottoman Jews. Look, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
Palestine was part of their own country, and they talk about this all the time. They say Palestine is already ours, so to speak, as Ottomans, you know, and we are loyal to the Ottoman Empire. This is one of the reasons why there wasn't really this Jewish question. The Ottoman state saw the Jews as en Sadiq Millet. Again, that's that term Millet, the most loyal people, the most loyal community. If there was somebody that the Ottoman state was against, it was the Armenians, especially, or it would be the
Yeah.
Greeks. You know, so Jews are implicated subjects, so to speak. And I've a graduate student, Oya Aktash, writing an excellent dissertation on the relationship between Jews and Armenians in the Ottoman Empire and the impact of the Armenian genocide on Ottoman Jews who are trying to toe the line. They're trying to defend themselves by continuing to pledge loyalty to the Ottoman state. And so what that does is the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire, the editors of the main Ladino newspapers in Salonika, in Istanbul, are all formally anti-Zionist. But they have strong connections to the land of Israel because it is
Sure.
in their orbit. It is not a foreign land. It is part of their own space. So the irony there, or the difference, is very strong connections to the land of Israel, to the people and the culture and the place of Israel, or Palestine, Palestina, as they called it in Ladino, that is paired with vehement opposition to Zionism as a political movement. And I'm writing an article about the Jews from Rhodes who came to the United States in the beginning of the 20th century. And Rhodes was part of the Ottoman Empire, then was part of the Italian Empire. Today it is a Greek island. It's a vacation destination. Very important Jewish community there, who were deported to Auschwitz exactly 82 years ago this week, in fact.
Mm.
And I found a fascinating article in the Ladino press in the New York in the early 20th century from 1918, the end of World War I. Rhodes was part of Italy by this time. And there's a new small Zionist group that is being established in New York, and they invite the Jews of Rhodes to participate in it. Okay. And the Jews of, and the invitation says, you guys are Italians, so you're not Ottomans anymore. So, you know, don't worry about your anxieties about what's going to, and they write back and they say, how dare you say that? Rhodes might be part of Italy now, but we are still Ottomans and we are faithful to the Ottoman Empire. And they were then accused of being disloyal to the Jewish people. I mean, it's the same script.
Sure. Yeah.
And what did the Jews of Rhodes respond? This is a polemic in the Ladino press. It says, no, you guys, you Zionists, you're the entregantes, you're the true traitors, you're the real charlatans. And they go on to say that we are, let me see, I have the quote here that says, every member of our community of the Rhodesies unanimously believes that we should not participate in any movement like Zionism that could damage the position of our brethren in the Ottoman Empire. Okay? So it's a really
Oh,
fascinating.
interesting. So they say it explicitly that it's about the position in the Ottoman Empire. Interesting.
Yeah. So you have others that will make it about like, what are you going to do? You're gonna rip us away from our neighbors? Like we live
Right.
together with our Arab neighbors. You're gonna, I mean, you have these lines. Even the chief rabbi, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Mandate Palestine, Rav Uziel, makes a comment like this in the 1940s when the discussion of partition is being talked about. And he says, what are you going to do? You're going to like kick out our neighbors? This is a ridiculous idea." And he's a Zionist, but the idea of partition or creating an exclusivist Jewish nation state was like really anathema for many of
Yeah.
these leaders coming from this multicultural, multinational society that they had inhabited.
Yeah. That. Um. So I'm going to actually ask this, even though it's not where I want to head. I'm going to head there in a second. But one of the things that's really interesting with the multinational way you're talking about it, right, is like, what was the relationship towards nationalism for these different groups, right? Like, you're an Ottoman Turk, you're an Ottoman Greek, you're an Ottoman Jew, you're
Right.
whichever. And so your national identity is it Ottoman Jew or is it Jew? And how do those two things play together?
So it is contested, I think is the easiest way to think about it.
Okay.
So it is contested, and there are class and ideological dimensions to this. So, like the middle classes, which won't be a surprise, the bourgeoisie are going to be the most like patriotic for the Ottoman Empire, and they're also going to be the vanguard of the burgeoning Zionist movement in that environment. But
Mhm.
the earliest manifestations of Sephardic Zionism, they call themselves Zionist, but they are very clear that they do not mean creating an independent Jewish state. That is not, that is completely the off the realm of possibilities, at least until the end of World War One. Once the British take over the mandate, things change. This has to do with, again, their fealty to the Ottoman state, and they don't want the violent hand of the Ottoman state to come down on them as a separatist movement, as had happened to the Armenians in the 1890s, and then again World War One, the Armenian genocide. So when they say that, those who say, which is a small group, who say that they are Ottoman Jewish Zionists, what do they mean? Is they mean that Jewish life should be developed in Palestine, and it should be continuing to operate under the auspices of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
And that just as the ancestors of the Sephardic Jews living in the Ottoman Empire had been saved from the persecuting hand of the Inquisition in Spain after 1492, so too should the Jews persecuted in Russia or Poland or Romania or wherever it is, they should find shelter in the lands of the Ottoman Empire, and they should go.
Interesting.
It should be open to them, and not to the exclusion of anybody else, but it should be open
Right.
to them. And the expectation is they will Ottomanize,
Right.
just as we have Ottomanized ourselves. So that's what Ottoman Jewish Zionism means in the 1910s. And it will
That's
change
fascinating.
completely later on. But it is a very, you see the emergence already of, some ideas, especially among Sephardic Jews living in Ottoman Palestine, um, with this idea of creating in Palestine after World War One, once the British are in place there, they say we need to create a moledet hameshutefet, a shared homeland. This is before Brit Shalom. Later on,
Yeah.
argues for nationalism. This is the argument that they're making. It says one land, two people. What are you going to do? Again, what are you going to do? We've been living together since time immemorial here for hundreds of years. You're going to kick part of us out? You're going to make part of us. They cannot fathom that as a possible solution. So, you see repudiation of the Balfour Declaration. This Rhodes organization in New York, that's how they conclude their letter. We repudiate the Balfour Declaration.
Huh.
It's very fascinating.
Yeah,
Past history.
yeah. Especially, I mean, what's coming up in my mind here too is, the colonial lens of Central, Eastern, Western European Zionism, of being like, we actually know better what should be happening in Palestine than the Jews that already live in Palestine, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and that created tremendous resentments. I mean, among, until the late 19th century, Ladino was the primary Jewish language spoken in Palestine. We
yeah,
don't think about that. I mean, more than Arabic, more than Yiddish. The dominant groups in Jerusalem, elsewhere, they were Ladino speakers. And I see this in reports from missionaries going to Ottoman Palestine in the 1920s. And they go to Jerusalem and say, we want it, we're going. These are American missionaries. They go from New England to Jerusalem in the 1820s. They're like the first Americans that go to the Middle East. What are they doing? They're going to convert the Jews. Okay. And they get there and what do they discover? Oh my God, I got to learn Ladino because that's how I'm going to talk to the local Jews, whether you're in Tiberias or you're in Hebron or you're in Jerusalem. And the missionaries, they in their memoirs and the reports back, they say, I need to find a Ladino tutor. My Ladino tutor quit on me. What am I going to do? How am I going to do it? Like, so there's this really interesting way in which the Ottoman Sephardic Jewish elite became attached to the old guard of the Ottoman Empire. And um, they are displaced by the Zionist movement. They are
yeah,
displaced also by the incoming Jews from Europe. We speak a lot about I mean, Rav Kook is a well-known figure. The first he's considered the first chief rabbi. I mean, he's the Ashkenazi chief rabbi. There's
right.
also the Sephardic chief rabbi, Rav Uziel, about whom we speak very little, though he's very interesting ideas. He promoted women's suffrage, whereas Rav Kook did not, for example. So all sorts of interesting dynamics. He might have expected to be the other way around, but it wasn't. So
Yeah.
anyhow,
Fascinating. No, that's all. Yeah, thank you. Um, so part of your recent work is, and all of your work is about Ladino and Sephardic history generally, and then a large part of it is about Ladino leftism. And Jewish leftism is having a moment in America, and a lot of it is like explicitly and extremely Eastern European Jewish focused. Doikite is everywhere, and
actually, it's only
every
here. It's not everywhere. It's here. Come on, Andy. No, yes, yes. That was a bad joke, maybe, but
no,
yeah.
it was a great joke. I loved it. Um, so how do you relate to that attempt at reclamation that's happening, the way that this is becoming kind of very widespread, the concept of doikite, the way that it was used in Eastern Europe, and how it works with regard to your understanding of, which we'll get to, of the actual relationship of Jews to where they are, where they've been, all of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I really appreciate the concept of Doe Kite. I think it is really doing important work in the contemporary political moment. I think, you know, what I would say is that if we historicize a little bit, we're able to begin to see both some of the opportunities, like what is the context out of which the concept emerges, and also maybe some of the limitations. And, just to briefly recapitulate a sense of what is Doikite, and this is not my research. I mean, there's been a lot of scholarship out there, but one of the key concepts Doikite is here-ness, the here-ness of the diaspora, which is perceived in the contemporary discourse is to be prioritized over the there-ness of Israel. And so it's positioned sort of against the aspirations of Zionism to establish, initially historically, to establish a Jewish state in Israel, to maintain that Jewish state. And Doikite is instead about it is about the importance of living and organizing and fighting for justice for Jews and their neighbors wherever they live. And that is a message that I'm fully on board with. That I'm fully on board with that. And there's that famous, Bund election poster, and this concept comes out of the Bund, which was the Jewish Labor Bund, which was the most important Yiddish-speaking Jewish socialist organization in Eastern Europe, focused really in like Russia, Poland, Lithuania. But they had this election poster from the end of World War One that says, from Yiddish, it says, "Where we live, that's our homeland," or a variation of that slogan is part of Molly Crabapple's new book about the Bund. Here, where we live, is our country. That idea, and Doikite is seen as an affirmation of diaspora and an expression of valorization of of diaspora Jewish life. But what are some of my reservations about this concept? The dichotomy. Number one is the dichotomy about here and there. I think there needs to be more than these two places, here and there. There needs to be maybe many heres, maybe multiple theirs. And this may be just a linguistic or rhetorical thing, but I think it has some actual practical power, which is also then related to, because what it does is it replicates the distinction between Israel and the diaspora. And when we speak about diaspora Judaism or diasporism, the way that this term is deployed in our contemporary discourse is that it is set up counter to Israel. So the irony for me is that Israel still is the center of the thing. So in seeking to displace Israel as the center, it actually is the central place, like we're still orbiting around it.
Sure.
It's sort of like, I don't know, it's like, I don't know, atheism. Still, God is still the center of the concept. Like, you're against it, but you haven't quite transcended it or gotten beyond it in a certain way. So I think that Doikite in some ways reinforces the centrality of Israel, and maybe there's a way to think about it differently, right? The other implicit thing there is, the Bund is inspired historically by ideas of diaspora nationalism, right? Yeah. So they are thinking of Jewishness as a national formation that is not going to have its own state, right? And so that's also interesting when you think about Judaism beyond nationalism. Where does the Bundist idea of diaspora nationalism fit in there? And is it really Judaism beyond nationalism, or is it Judaism beyond certain formulations of exclusivist, statist nationalism? I'm not sure. There's some nuances there, but I think, that's another component.
And
yeah,
I would also say to probably not as extreme as what you were talking about with Raider Marcus, but like, who was included in that Jewish nation that the Bundists saw?
So that's what I'll bring for you now, because this is a very specific understanding of what constitutes the Jewish nation, and Yiddishkeit, Yiddishness. I mean, Yiddishkeit not in the sense of Jewishness, but Yiddishkeit in this sense of specifically Yiddish cultural manifestations of Jewishness were understood to be the meaning of Jewish. Okay, the meaning of Jewish. And so I did a little research, and I've one or two very brief references to this in the Jewish Currents piece about the Ladino left, but we can see the indifference, maybe even the animosity toward non-Yiddish speaking Jews among Bundists, among leftists. And this may be uncomfortable. We maybe would prefer if they had not said these things or written these things, but we got to grapple with it. We got to grapple with it if we're going to really be serious in thinking about what are the stakes at hand. So one of the most important Bundist ideologues was Vladimir Medem. And he wrote this famous essay in 1911 called The Worldwide Jewish Nation. And he describes Yiddish as the language of the Jewish nation across political borders. You say, well, maybe he didn't know that there were other Jews, or he didn't, no. Well, no. He was a bright guy. He was educated, but he specifically addresses it. He addresses the existence of other Jews. He says that it's unclear to him whether those Jews speaking the Españolski jargon, Ladino, which he calls Spanish, okay? So it's not a Jewish language. It's not marked as Jewish. He doesn't think that culture would be, that language would be capable of a cultural revival. And he says that they would, these Sephardic Jews would either need to assimilate into their surrounding societies, or if they retain their identity, that would render them, and this is a quote, completely separate and distinct from Eastern European Jewry. So he's anxious, actually, about competition over who's going to get to claim the status of the Jewish nation. And so I think from he didn't go out and go this far, but I think for him it would be better if these non-Yiddish speaking Jews disappeared.
I mean,
So
that's what he said, right? That
that's what
they
I'm
want to
saying.
assimilate into,
Right.
yeah,
Or but if they don't assimilate, they would be competition for us for
right.
claiming, right? So he doesn't want competition. Okay. So we get another example. Chaim Zhitlovsky is another very important Yiddishist. He was also involved in in Bundist activities and leftist activities in Eastern Europe and and in the United States. And he is very focused also in insisting that what is the motivating life force of this diaspora Jewish nation is Yiddish culture, only Yiddish culture. And he writes in 1897 in the first publication by the Bund, in the introduction to this, he says, why only Yiddish? This is the title of the thing. All other nations have a single language and single literature. They hold that one language dear and its literature sacred. So for Zhitlovsky, that language is going to be Yiddish, Hebrew, Ladino, Judeo, forget Judeo-Arabic. Judeo-Arabic almost never comes up in these conversations. Judeo-Farsi never comes
I
up.
was going to say the
Aware
Persian
of
Jews, yeah.
They seem to be aware of Ladino, and they are like insisting that it's not a Jewish language. That's number one, and it's not a vital culture. It's a backwards culture that's been subsumed by the despotism of the Orient and of Islam. So, in other words, this is the Eurocent, and they're not saying anything special here. They're
Right.
just replicating the general Orientalism and racism, of the era. And so, for me, it's both the concept of Doikite and this dichotomy, and wanting to maybe move away from that and think about the multiplicity of spaces of connection for Jewish life, and then also understanding the historical context in which the concept of Doikite comes out, which is hardcore Ashkenazi exclusive in its
Yeah.
framework of what constitutes Jewishness. That doesn't mean the concept should be discarded in any way, but I do think we have to grapple with some of these more challenging or maybe limiting components that I've raised.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the same way that at the ACJ we have to grapple with that history here too, right? I mean, I think that one of the hallmarks kind of I mean, my big pet peeve that anyone that ever talks to me about contemporary Judaism is the word peoplehood and the way that it has been used, and what it does to kind of try to smooth over all of these tensions you're describing. Um, and so I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know you've done a lot of work on this concept of multi-rootedness, and what does it look like to be able to um, accept all of these different variations on what it means to be Jewish, and in doing so, still maintain that there is some kind of connection between all of them.
Mhm. That's the trick. That's
Yeah.
that's the big question. I mean, I think maybe a way to segue into that is through your comment just now about peoplehood. And what's really interesting is how do Ladino publications and writers use the term pueblo, people. So, and they speak about themselves as part of three different peoples, which is also very interesting. And they talk about pueblos in the plural. So they will say, we are one of the Jewish pueblos, which is very fascinating. More than one Jewish people. And this is maybe a very provocative thing to say, but it wasn't a foregone conclusion that at the end of the day there was only going to be one Jewish people or one Jewish nation. Like, this was very much contested, if that was even going to be the teleology to begin with. And Sephardic Jews are aware of this. They're aware of the tensions. They feel the exclusions when they come to New York or when they are in Palestine or other places. They really feel those exclusions. There's even a movement that emerges in the 1930s of Sephardic nationalism, which says, like, basically, we are a separate nation. They're the Ashkenazi Jews, and they are the German and the Polish Jews, and then they're us, we're the Spanish Jews. They don't say, they take on a Eurocentric attitude there too. We're not the backwards Oriental Jews you thought we were. We're the heirs of Maimonides. And
Was this in America?
this is in America, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, right?
In the 1930s. Okay, so you have that. So they're one of several Jewish peoples. They also will speak about being one of several Ottoman or Turkish peoples or Oriental peoples. Like there's the Greeks and the Turks and the Armenians and the Arabs. There's us, the Sephardic Jews. We are one of the Ottoman peoples, and we're part of that constellation of peoples, just like we're also part of the constellation of Jewish peoples. And then they also speak about a third people that they see themselves as one representative of, and that is the Spanish or Hispanic people. Pueblo Hispánico or Pueblo Español, they speak about. And who are the constituents of the Hispanic people? It's a tripartite people with three subpeoples or three peoples in this pan people. I mean, the different ways that they describe it, and the language is a little bit slippery sometimes, but who are the three peoples? The Spaniards, Latin Americans, and Sephardic Jews. And isn't that fascinating? So it's like this pan-Hispanic people that they see themselves also attached to. And they speak about one of the founder of the first Sephardic Studies program at the in the United States was a guy by the name of Meir Ben Ardete. And he was the chair of Sephardic Studies at Columbia University in the 1930s, which is also where the first Jewish history professorship was established.
That was Salo Baron, right? Yeah.
Now, Ben Ardete, where does he set up Sephardic Studies? Inside of the Hispanic Institute. First Sephardic Studies program inside of the Hispanic Institute. And he says that the Hispanic soul is a tripartite alma, a three-part soul. The Spanish part, the Latin American part, and the Sephardic part. Okay, so they're like swimming in all sorts of alternative possibilities that do not in any way point toward the assumption that at the end of the day, there's only be one Jewish people and we're going to be part of it. There may be multiple Jewish peoples. There may be one Jewish people, but we're part of that people and part of other peoples simultaneously. And that's what's really interesting about this dynamic. And I think that helps us get to this concept of multi-rootedness that I'd like to discuss a little bit. Did you want, is that okay? Or you want me to go
Yeah,
there?
please. No, that's where I was trying to get.
Yeah, so multi-rootedness is this concept I came across, and I've adopted and elaborated it from a French philosopher, Edgar Morin, or that's what he was. That was his nom de guerre. He was in the French Resistance during World War II, which has a very different ring than his birth name, which was David Nahum. His parents were immigrants from Salonika who'd come during World War One. And he recently died, actually. He was 104 years old, but continued to be very active. And he gained some notoriety for being very outspoken in his criticisms of Israel. But what's interesting for our purposes here is how did he think of this concept of multi-rootedness? Or in French, it's polyraciment. And previous translators have translated it as poly-rooted, but I decided to call it multi-rooted because I think that's more conducive to how we speak in English. Yeah. Multi-rooted, I think, resonates a little bit more. He's very, very famous in France, sometimes compared to or discussed along with Foucault and Derrida, but almost none of his stuff has been translated into English. And I came across him because he wrote a family memoir. And in the family memoir, he speaks about when his father and uncles arrived in Marseille during World War I, and they were asked by the police to put their nationality down. And he describes how the story that was communicated to him was the debate that they had over what is their nationality. He said, well, if we say that we're Ottoman, we could be interned as enemy aliens because the Ottoman Empire and France were on the opposite sides of the war. They said, well, our parents had Italian nationality because they had come at a certain point in the 18th century from Livorno. and had Italian consular protection, and said, well, but that's not going to really do us what we want here, and we're not really Italian. In Spain, maybe we're Spanish, but Spanish is so long ago, and well, Salonika is Greek now. But if we say that we're Greek, maybe they'll deport us to make us do military service in Greece. So what did they wind up doing? Is they put down that their nationality was Salonicien, Salonican. The city was their nation. And he uses this as a foray to speak about this idea of multi-rooted, the multi-rootedness. Like, here are his parents, and it's something that you're connected to, but it's also, these are identities that are to be deployed in different contexts. He speaks about Salonika as la petite patrie, his little homeland, but he also speaks about how he has roots all across the Mediterranean. And at the end of the day, if you ask him what is his patrie, it is the Mediterranean. And now that's not normally how we think about a homeland. First of all, it's a sea, not a land. There's the first problem with that. And number one, there's no state boundaries. There's no state borders. And so it gives us a very different understanding of what the meaning of nationality and homeland is, what our roots, what is a diaspora. And so he wants to think about him having the capacity to move between these different places and recognize and claim a relationship to all of these different territories, all of their cultures, not necessarily to the state, but to the place, to the environment, to the people. And he biologizes it, actually, which is a little bit troubling for me. He writes in the 90s, if my genes and my chromosomes could speak, they would tell you of a Mediterranean odyssey starting more or less like Ulysses, but a little farther south in the Asian Mediterranean, today's Middle East. I think this is the closest he's going to get to acknowledging some kind of connection to Israel-Palestine. They would speak to you of their travels through the Roman Empire, their arrival in the Iberian Peninsula, and they would describe routes put out over more than 1,000 years until 1492. They would describe to you how my convert ancestors were for 2 centuries subjected to baptism as conversos. They would speak about how they were re-Judaized in Italy, and then they were driven by powerful currents of economic expansion to Salonika and the Ottoman Empire. My genes and my chromosomes would tell you that all these successive Mediterranean identities are symbiotically united in me, and that during this millenarian odyssey, the Mediterranean has become my deeply felt motherland. My taste buds are Mediterranean and cry out for olive oil. They revel in grilled aubergines and pimentos and crave tapas and mezes. My ears adore flamenco and oriental chants. Okay, so he's kind of playing on some stereotypes here, but it's potent here, right? The imagery.
Yeah.
And in my soul, there is something that puts me in filial resonance with the Mediterranean sky, its sea, its coasts, its arid wastes, and its fertility. And for me, what was so startling when I read this was it kind of cohered for the first time for me what I had been seeing in my resources and my sources, where they are using the Ladino term patria to describe many different places. Palestina is our patria. Sepharad is our patria. El Imperio Ottoman, Turkey, is our patria. Salonika is our patria. La America, where we are living now, is our patria. And sometimes they say they're all our patrias at the same time.
Yeah.
And you don't have to pick one over the other. And for me, that's what's really fascinating. And for me, it provides 2 paths. One is to claim relationship to these multiple geographies, these multiple spaces. I feel that personally, like other Sephardic people are probably in my, I've been eligible for 5 passports in my life. 5. That's a lot. There are 12 million stateless people, and here I can go around and get 5 passports. I mean, that's a dramatic reversal of fortunes, So it's an opportunity to stake a claim in a variety of geographies. Not here, over there, but here and maybe there, and maybe somewhere else. He has a really fascinating line too about how this is Morin again, how he has 1 foot in France, 1 foot in 1 foot in Italy, 1 foot in Salonika, and 1 foot in the entirety of the Levant. And that's a lot of feet.
That's a
Most
lot of
people
feet.
can't
He's a
do it
spider.
at max, right? But I think there's something evocative about that image. The roots. Imagine a tree with all these sort of different roots
Yeah,
going in different directions, stretching out. I think that's one possibility. Another possibility is to acknowledge the absurdity of the whole system to begin with.
right.
And this is brought home to me in the writing, and I'm grateful to my colleague Davy Mays at Michigan, who wrote a really great book. And one of the sources that she came up with is the writing of a guy named Mauricio Fresco, who was an Istanbul-born diplomat. He was the son of the editor of the main Ladino newspaper in Istanbul, and he talk about multi-rooted or whatever. He was born in Istanbul, an Ottoman citizen. He served in. He moved to France, and then he became a French ambassadorial attaché in Mexico. Okay, and he wrote a book he drafted a book that was never published. The title of the book was "Forge Your Own Passport," and what he wanted to demonstrate in this text was to, quote, prove the stupidity of passports, visas, nationalities, races, etc. So, what we can also get from this is a recognition of the fact, not that it doesn't have, not that it doesn't have real material ramifications. You have citizen, Hannah Arendt, you mentioned earlier, Hannah Arendt says, you know, citizenship is the right to have rights. If you don't have a state willing to protect you in our world, you're not going to be protected. But that is not a natural phenomenon. That is a socially and politically and legally contrived system. And I think that's what Fresco is pointing out. And I think an insight that we can also gather when we see Edgar Morin talking about his 10 feet. you know,
Yeah,
he turned himself. He started talking about Odysseus, but I mean, he really did turn himself into a Greek mythological character in a certain sense.
yeah. Um, I mean, first of all, I want to say to everybody that's here, we're going to open up for questions shortly. I'm going to, so take your time to think about it. Also, um, I always say this whenever I open up for questions. Um, a question ends with a question mark. So please think about what you want to ask, and like you can create a little bit of context if you want, but think about where you're going to land that question mark before you ask. And if you have a question you'd like to ask, turn your video on, which you are now able to do, and then I'll ask you to come off mute. Um, what all of what you just said um, brought up to me a few different things. One is the current context in America, right? That whiteness does the opposite of all of that, right? It tries to completely wipe out all difference and create this almost culturalist melange of of hierarchical power that doesn't have roots elsewhere. It's only this in this one place, which is um, really fascinating because so many American Jews and that are white try to use their Jewish identity in some ways as a way to um, uh, add some flavor to that whiteness, right? Um, and what you're describing are people that want to add all of the flavors entirely to their identity and have them all going at the same time, which is the next version of that in some ways. It's also bringing up for me this the book that Sean McGee put out like 13 years ago now of American post-Judaism, which is that like this post-ethnic thing that we've got going on in America is going to require Jews to rethink our entire self-understanding because that reliance upon ethnicity is failing. And one of the thinkers I've been going to help myself understand this, which is very, very similar, is Stuart Hall.
Mhm.
Right? Stuart Hall writes a whole lot about multi-diasporism, and as a UK citizen whose family came through Jamaica from Africa and all of the complexities therein, he talks about diasporism not as here and there, but all of these different theirs to let you be here, right? And that drawing upon those is what creates like something beautiful and new that is pointing backwards, but it's pointing backwards to a place that doesn't actually exist, right? Um, and so it's really, really productive to hear you talk about this from a Ladino Sephardic standpoint too, because we are in this moment of great opportunity in the American Jewish world with a rising desire for this diasporic discourse around what it means to be Jewish, as opposed to the like flattening nature of Zionism and peoplehood of like we're all Judeans, which is like bonkers, right? Um, and so I'm really, really grateful for you bringing all of those sources. Right now, I'm vamping a little bit because no one has come off video or come on video to asking questions. If there are no questions, that's fine. Y'all don't need to ask questions. We're not paying you. Um, so, oh, great. Okay. Emmanuel, please.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sorry, it's Tisha B'Av, so I'm not feeling very video ready with the fast. But thank you as always, and this is just a really great entrevista. I wanted to ask because I thought it might be of some interest to some of the other people here. If you could talk a little bit about the kind of idea of like Ladino as a Kupri that you've kind of written about in your poetry and elsewhere, and um, kind of the linkages there with I think that came up. I felt that a little bit when you were talking about the tripartite kind of Hispanic world, but would love to know if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. And everybody should check out Emmanuel's zine, Gazos de Framboise, which is a really great publication coming out of Miami, which you can find online. Dealing with some of the themes we're talking about here, and I appreciate your question very much. I think if the Yiddish left was really oriented toward Yiddish, the Ladino left was not a Ladino left in the way that the Yiddish left was the Yiddish left. By which I mean Ladino was a key feature, but it was the key component of the Ladino left was not the focus on Ladino, but it was rather multilingualism, I would say. It was multilingualism and seeing inside of Ladino the kernels of building cultural cupris, as Emmanuel mentioned, bridges to other kinds of communities. So inside of Ladino, there is Spanish and Portuguese, there is Hebrew, there is Arabic, there is Greek, there is Turkish. And so if you know Ladino, you have some capacity, some basics to reach out a hand to people across different kinds of cultures. And on top of that, many of the Ladino speaking Jews were multilingual. And I mean, in Eastern Europe, maybe you knew Yiddish and maybe you knew Russian and maybe you, I don't know, you knew French or German. Among the Ladino speaking Jews, knowing 3 or 4 languages did not make you like an intellectual. It made you a stevedore at the port. I mean, knowing 10 languages, now that was something, and that was something that one would do. And the FBI complained that the editor of one of the Ladino socialist newspapers that they wound up closing down, he knew they had 2 complaints. They're like, he knows 10 languages. This is too many languages to know, and we're anxious. We're anxious about what that means. What that means to know so many languages. And the second problem that the FBI had, or it was actually the post office, they revoked the ability of the newspaper to be delivered, the mail permit, was because they couldn't get any censors to figure out what it meant. They got the Yiddish translator, the Italian translator, and the Spanish translator to sit there together to break their eyes over trying to decipher a Ladino newspaper. In the end, the translator said, well, we spent all day, we did 2 paragraphs, this is not a good waste of our resources. So what did the post office do? They said, well, just cancel the newspaper, rather than figuring out really how radical it is. But I mean, I think, what this does is it suggests this, how did the bridges work? And I think for the Ladino left, it was through language, really, and culture became a bridge. Music also playing this kind of role as well. Like the Ladino speaking Jews, what kind of music did they get involved in? They got involved in Middle Eastern Oriental music. they got involved in Latin music. One of the first places outside of Spanish Harlem where Ladino-speaking Jews and Puerto Ricans lived, one of the reasons it's probably called Spanish Harlem because of Puerto Rican and also Sephardic Jewish presence there, was a club in Midtown called the Cuban Casino in the 1930s, owned by a Sephardic Jew from Salonika, who held meetings of the Communist Party at the club, and whose house singer performed at Sephardic bar mitzvahs in the Bronx, and she was Mexican, not Jewish. So like, that's like a fascinating like cultural milieu. And you can also see it in like a place like Chicago for these bridges. Really fascinating. In Chicago, Sephardic Jews from the Ottoman Empire, they were Ladino speaking. They organized the first Greek branch of the Communist Party, 1918, 1919. And they are organizing with Greeks, but they also bring in Armenians, they bring in Bulgarians, and there seems to be some suggestion that they also bring in some Mexicans as well. And the leader of this movement is really fascinating. He's a guy by the name of Nassim Hanoka, and he was one of these guys who knew a lot of languages. He became a dentist. He was a radical dentist, and I've traced down his advertisements in the press. And in Ladino, he says, in Ladino, he writes, I'm a Spanish dentist. And then he says, because I am Sephardi, I speak Judeo-Spanish, Ladino, Greek, Turkish, French, etc. I don't know what etc. means, but there are other languages there. And in the Greek press, he calls himself a Greek dentist. And in the Spanish American press, he calls himself a Spanish dentist or Latin dentist. And I found other references to him, which he never called himself, other references to him in the press as a Muslim Turk or an Indian, as in from South Asia. So like he made allegiances and alliances of his own choosing and pivoted his identity to create these bridges. But sometimes he also couldn't be placed at all. He couldn't be classified. But I think that's both the opportunity of the bridge that comes with the Ladino and the multilingualism of the multi-rooted approach, and also the liability that comes with being also incomprehensible, unclassifiable. Where do you belong? You're not here, you're not there. Where are you at the end of the day?
Amazing. Thank you. We've got another question from Deidre.
Yeah, merci mucho. It is really, really good to have you here speaking to us and sharing a lot of your wisdom and insight. And one thing that was really turning over in my head as you were talking is what sorts of things have you noticed in terms of maybe improvements or even limitations of, I guess, Deutschheit 2.0? You know, this revitalization. It feels like it's a little more broad than just a nationalism or regional thing. It feels more collective, like everyone should be safe where they live. What do you kind of see going on in that landscape?
Well, I think that's a really key, maybe the key component. You know, I alluded to the fight for justice and equality wherever Jews live for themselves and for their neighbors. And I find that to be a very clear and still resonant clarion call about what this moment needs. So I think in that regard, I am completely in favor of the concept. I think it needs to be. I think we just need to be aware of some of the historical, contextual, maybe baggage that comes from it, and maybe there are ways also to improve upon the discourse by considering it as part of a menu of dispositions or of ideological statements. Maybe multi-rootedness could form a complement to that. Maybe there are other ideas that come out of other Jewish traditions that we can bring to bear to create, these kinds of solidarities that are really important at the moment. I think one of the things that the multi-rootedness of the Levantine or Sephardic Jewish experience brings is it just so happens to conveniently be that through the Sephardic dynamic, we have a connection to the Spanish-speaking world, and we have a connection to the Muslim world. And I feel like that's very useful material for building solidarity and coalition in the fight against ICE, on the one hand, in the United States, in the fight for Palestinian liberation on the other hand. Um, and so there's something there, I hope, waiting to be, enacted, to be brought to bear. Thinking about, Spanish music, let's call it Spanish music played as Middle Eastern music. I mean, this is Ladino music, and that then also becomes this kind of, a kind of bridge. And it's fascinating when I've interacted with Palestinians or other Arabs or Middle Easterners, and there's an immediate familiarity with the melodies. And on the other hand, interacting with, I don't know, Puerto Ricans or Cubans or other people like that, well, the Spanish is like, we can sort of understand this. This is quite mutually intelligible. And then you can also play a role of maybe there's a way to bring together these other communities that maybe have some points of distance or difference. So this is a little bit utopian, but I feel like there's a lot of potential that can come with using some of these elements to build build not only a narrative, not only an identity, but also political action.
Yeah. That is excellent Tisha B'Av Torah. Really, really, yeah. I'm noting that I've kept you 6 minutes longer.
It's fine. I'm happy.
But we do have another question if you're
Yeah, yeah.
cool. Sydney, we'd love to hear your question.
Hi, Devin. You're amazing. I think you already know that. But I have a specific question for you. All of this issue of multi-rootedness, I feel very biographically because my family came from Egypt. They're very well rooted in the Ottoman Empire in different places. To what extent some of the things that you're describing at this moment are in the books of history? I feel them because I am the son of immigrants from the Levant. So I have it very vividly in my life. But to what extent people that are more distant biographically from the Levant still have it or still can reclaim it?
I think it's a very important point, and it's something that Andy and I actually talked about. In like, what are some of the limitations? Also, this problem of nostalgia. I think Morin has some nostalgia for this, this long lost world of Mediterranean coexistence that he wants to believe can be a model for the future. I mean, the Mediterranean is a violent place. Um, the Levant, in particular, has become a violent place. So I think, you know, one of the concepts that Andy and I were talking about before was the nostalgia, and I feel like there is a risk of dipping too much into nostalgia. This sense of, like in the ancient Greeks, to go back to Homer and the Odyssey. I mean, this is where nostalgia, it comes from. This idea of the pain caused by a yearning to return to a beloved place or a situation or a person, and not being able to do it. Not being able to do it. That's the key component of nostalgia, is you can't get there. Even if it existed in the first place, is another story. But even if it did exist, you can't get there. And so, I have this sense of affinity. Maybe be critical, I could call it nostalgia. I mean, I'm willing to, to own that. My grandfather, I was just in Salonika. My nono, my grandfather from Salonika, brought my kids. We went there. We went to his street. His building's not there, but the street that he was born on is there. Guess what the name of the street was then? It's still now. It's Odysseus Street. Okay, so it's Odos Odysseus. It's Odysseus Street. So I think what we need to do is we need to be realistic, and we need to recognize the profound impact of rupture, the profound dislocation and obliteration of that kind of world, the Levantine world of your forebears, of mine. And so, to what extent can we reclaim this? To what extent can we reconstruct it? I'm not sure. I wonder if it is more, we have to be honest. It may be more of a creative act of reinvention. In other words, we have materials there. We have materials there, but we have to be creative in deploying them and making them make sense for us and making them useful in the ways that we want. So it may be in part through instilling in the younger generation a sense of affinity to these worlds or these identities that maybe have been occluded, or lost in the way that they have been. This is maybe the sign of American Jews, Sephardic Jews also becoming part of this new American Jew. It's a flattening, right?
Mhm.
It's a flattening. The next generation, does everybody know? I mean, people of Eastern European background, they don't necessarily know, did their grandparents, great grandparents, did they come from Minsk or Pinsk or Bialystok, whatever? I don't know. Eastern Europe, I don't know. Poland, I don't know. I don't know. People don't know anymore. For Sephardic Jews, I think it's still a little closer. People tend to know where their grandparents or their great grandparents came from, but that's being lost too. And so there needs to be some creative act and some real attention to trying to ensure that the way that we educate, whether I think in Jewish institutions in general, but certainly those that are on the left or progressive leaning, we have to open it up so that people can have access to their family histories, so that there's a multiplicity of Jewish stories that they can connect into, so that Bialystok is important or whatever, or Vienna, I don't know, the Bund of the Eastern European of Europe. I don't want to displace that in any way, but there's got to be room. There's got to be room for a greater multiplicity of kinds of Jewish histories, of Jewish cultures, of Jewish past. And I mean that's the work of that's the work of education, and hopefully that can become a kernel to building rebuilding, reinventing some of those feelings that you feel, that will help people to then deploy it in their political lives as well.
Great. Thank you. Raquel.
Sorry, I'm so sorry for the creepy lighting. I've created some bad sleep habits with
Oh, it's
my
okay.
children. But I wanted to ask, because this talk has been so wonderful, and I feel like I understand my grandparents so much more, who lived in Venezuela, but my grandfather was constantly like, we are from Monte Libano, the mountainous region of Lebanon, where my great grandfather immigrated from.
Fascinating.
But are there a list of resources? Oh, I'm sorry. List of resources that you could provide for those of us who kind of want to extend this level of like this other world of Judaism to our friends, especially coming from the Northeast, where the prevalent, Jewish population is very Eastern European, and the push is like that sort of history, that and Yiddish, which I have, no problem with Yiddish, beautiful language. But up until even a year ago, I had brought up putting some Ladino in our Sidurim and Matzor, and a friend was like, "I've never heard of Ladino. What is that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's the language of the Sephardi." I thought everybody knew that, but if there are any resources you could provide, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question, and it is obviously a natural extension of what I was just describing. Like, you wouldn't educate. What do you get? What's the curriculum? What is the materials? So, I mean, I guess like in terms of starting bibliography, if you're able to get a hold of the pamphlet that Andy showed in the beginning, which I don't,
This one.
that one, yeah,
I can put a link in the chat too.
yeah, there's a little bibliography in the back. What I don't actually think they publish the bibliography online, but or if you email me, I could send you some stuff as well. I mean, it's something that I'm very interested in doing for the Reconstructionist movement. I put together a little curricular unit. It was on the question of American Jewishness and racism, and I put together a little unit, maybe a little bit provocative, but it's called Our Own Worst Enemies, and it's about intra-Jewish racism and prejudice, and that doesn't really give us the material for building a positive identity. It more helps us understand practices of exclusion, but I think that there is ample space and opportunity to develop. Like, I mean, like, so for example, Lebanon is a very interesting space in terms of Jewish history as a convergence site between Ladino-speaking Jews Arabic-speaking Jews, and also Yiddish-speaking Jews. And Palestine plays that's Egypt. These three places are very important historically as convergences of all of these Jewish kinds of cultures and languages and communities. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn and extract from those histories. Not to mention customs and practices and everything else like that. So if you reach out to me, I'd be happy to follow up with you. And I would encourage anybody want to be in touch, please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to be in touch.
And he is eminently Googleable. And if you have trouble, send me an email. Raquel, I know you definitely have mine. So, and I can put you in touch. I know that got my brain churning too, of like how we do so much education at the ACJ and multi-session classes and stuff, and how can we help with this? So that's another conversation for us to have, Devin.
Right, yeah. There's so many
Yeah.
thoughts like that. What I found that's been fascinating in my research is the counterintuitive some of the counterintuitive insights that you can glean from the Middle Eastern Jewish experience. Like I mentioned, the Sephardic chief rabbi being in favor of women's suffrage, where the Ashkenazi chief rabbi was not. I mean, that's maybe surprising from our contemporary perspective. You might imagine the more European one would be more open, and the more like Middle Eastern one wouldn't be. But it's like also another in the Rainbow Thread, which is a fascinating collection of like queer Jewish texts, includes a responsa of a rabbi from the Ottoman Empire at the late 19th century, which is considered the first trans-affirming rabbinic decision. And when the Jewish American trans movement emerges in the 70s and takes off in decades later, they're looking for where's the precedent where we can find some affirmation of the legitimacy of trans identity from a Jewish perspective. The only precedent in modern times they can find is this rabbi from Izmir in the Ottoman Empire who says it would have been better if this person who was born one way and decided to become another way, it would be better if they hadn't done that. But the fact is that they did do that, and so that's who they are now. And you have to treat them like that, which is very fast. And for 80 years, no other rabbi makes that argument. So they're really interesting kinds of nuggets that you can extract from the history of this a wide set of Jewish communities that maybe and still today are not part of that new American Jewish smushed together identity that I mentioned, that Jacob Rader Marcus raises. It's been outside of the curriculum. It's been outside of the consciousness in every domain. You want to talk about rabbis? You want to talk novelists? Who's your favorite Ladino novelist? Who's your favorite Judeo-Arabic writer? This is a rhetorical question. I think most people don't have answers to these questions. Who's your favorite Sephardic gangster? Did you know that Meyer Lansky, this is a real thing, Meyer Lansky, he was a Yiddish-speaking gangster in the early 20th century. His connection to the Cuban mob was through a Sephardic guy whose family came from Salonika. So they're there everywhere. They're just not part of our consciousness because they haven't been seen as Jews.
Yeah. Thank you. This is actually an incredible compliment to our last interview, which was with Walter and Farah Isaac, that are Hebrew Israelites, and they're the walls of what it means to be, what was it, homo novus in America, have excluded an incredible amount of riches that this is part of the new ACJ project. Let's rip back the curtain. Let's bring everything in, because we need all of it today. The next interview will be with someone else who's done some similar work, Zohara Jacoby, who started the Jew Witches website and has done a ton of work unearthing Jewish magic traditions and all kinds of other stuff, and being very outspoken about Palestine, is going to be in Devin's seat in a couple of weeks. We're going to announce registration in probably early next week. And so that's kind of what we're doing here. And Devin, thank you so much. I hope this is just the beginning. there's so much work to be done, and what you're doing is so deeply important to a creative American Judaism that's desperately needed right now.
Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it. Have the discussion. And again, I invite anybody to please be in touch. I'd love to continue the conversation. Thank you all.
great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good end to your fast if you are fasting, and